This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. Keep moving with Australia's #1 address in property.
It's great to have your company here on Business Now. So let's take you around the country on what was one of the biggest auction weekends of the year so far. So across Australia, just under 2,500 auctions, and the clearance rate eased up to around about 56% here. But look, the result depends on just where you live. In Sydney, for example, 1,073 auctions, fewer than 55% of those homes were sold. Melbourne, by contrast, there were 917 auctions. It was a bit stronger here, 64% of them sold, but that's still less than it was last week. In Brisbane, just 72 auctions, half of those were sold. Even Adelaide finally seems to be coming off the boil. 59 auctions and less than 60% were completed across there. That's the lowest clearance rate there in months, you'd have to say. In Canberra, 55 auctions, just over 58% were sold under the hammer. Anyway, let's bring in here the Economist from REA Group, Anne Flaherty, who's with me now. Anne, many thanks for your time. I mean, you just wonder whether some of the buyers are holding off, just waiting to see who wins the election and which of those housing policies comes into being.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people holding off at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, not just with what we're seeing in the global economy, but what's happening with interest rates. And then, of course, both the Coalition and Labor announced some absolutely major reforms to policies around first home buyers over the weekend. So I think there's certainly a lot of buyer demand out there. We're absolutely seeing that in terms of search behaviour on realestate.com.au. But at the same time, some buyers are very likely holding off until they have more certainty around what's on offer to them.
So isn't there a simple truth? We've had all sorts of economists calling out the government for trying to stimulate demand, but the reality is what you've got to stimulate is more home building. Have you seen much that gives you hope that there is going to be a lot more homes built in a relatively short space of time?
Look, I don't think that we're going to see a big increase in supply over the short term. I think both sides have actually got a few policies on offer that will provide more incentive to develop more over the longer term. But I think a lot of these policies we're seeing at the moment are really more demand side, which are very likely to just push up prices. And if you take into account the fact that we're looking down the barrel of several more interest rate cuts this year, even with these support measures for first home buyers, at the end of the day, they might still be having to pay just higher and higher prices.
So which capital cities right now do you sense as being the tightest markets that will really sort of suddenly see the spike in prices if all of these things come to be?
Well, it's quite interesting. I think if we look about the last couple of years, Melbourne has been a really big underperformer. But what we're seeing at the moment is population growth, particularly for young families, young professionals, is very strong in Melbourne. Now, this could actually signal a bit of a turnaround for home prices in Melbourne because we know that first home buyer activity is much stronger in the state of Victoria. On the other end of the spectrum, a market like Sydney, first home buyers typically account for a smaller proportion just due to that lack of affordability. So it'll be quite interesting to see if some of the dynamics that we saw over the past year actually end up reversing over the coming year as we start to see more first home buyer activity.
And the curiosity is if the Reserve Bank does cut rates, it's going to push up demand and potentially push up prices even more, making houses less affordable for many of the first home buyers.
Yeah, look, that's right. You know, people typically think of a cut in interest rates being fantastic news, but it's fantastic news for people who are already in the market and have a mortgage. For those people who are looking to buy, we do know that all else equal, when the Reserve Bank cuts interest rates, that typically leads to higher prices because people can borrow more. So I think that depending on how much rates get cut this year, that could really lead to a fair bit more steam under home price growth.
Indeed. Anne Flaherty, many thanks for your time as always.